Monica. Nice to see everyone this morning. It's a long week of presentations and great turnout that they've had here. Almost like 4,000 folks or something. So great engagement. So I know I've had the opportunity to present here a couple years in the past. Didn't want to repeat all the same things, but I also felt like it was a deck and a topic that is relevant every year in California, right? So for those that are new to it, I felt like it was some valuable stuff to revisit. So my presentation today is called Navigating IGP Industrial General Permit TMDL Compliance and Treatment Options. So outline for my presentation, a little background on myself and our company and what we do, high level on kind of just the industrial general permit, and then diving down really the specifics on the TMDLs, right? And how do we navigate some of that mess of acronyms and what that means for compliance. I'll talk about specifically working through attachment E, how to use the IGP Map Tool as some training things, about some enforcement trends here with minimum mandatory penalties, some updates there, some links you can use to reference and help out. Then I'll jump into the treatment side. Okay, well, here's what the permit says. Here's the things that we've got to do. How do we do them, right? How do we treat water in some of these difficult situations, some of these difficult contaminants? What are the general treatment approaches that can be used? And then I'll kind of do a deep dive by parameter. So we'll say, hey, let's talk about nitrate, let's talk about zinc, et cetera. And then I'll also talk about just, hey, what are some other contaminants out there to watch for in the future, and keep it open for questions. So I feel like I'll work through the deck in a good 30, 40 minutes top. So should have plenty of time for questions at the end. Yeah. Okay, so my name's TJ Mothersbaugh, sales here for Water Tectonics. I've been doing this for about 15 years. My background in biology, chemistry, and business, and it's a fun field. A lot of great things I've been able to learn and work with people in this growing and evolving field of stormwater. Our company has been around for about 25 years. We do design, manufacturing, and installation of stormwater treatment systems for clients, in a wide range of applications. We use a range of different treatment systems, but mostly what I would think of as pump and treat and above ground, right? So we're not talking concrete vaults underground, maybe like a Contec or an Old Castle or someone like that would do. Then we have a, deep in-house, design and lab services group that really helps with, determining the solution that's appropriate for a site, right? That's really the key in any project like this. Okay, well, I need to treat the water. Am I doing it the right way, right? And then we have a whole field services division and group that you go out and you put a treatment system in. Well, now it needs to, run, right, in perpetuity and run well. And you need people to run it, both on your team, right, and as well as having support for when you have questions. So, we've got clients, right, that we've had for 20 years, right, they've been running their systems. And so we've got to think about that long term. So our process really, we start with the evaluation, right? So someone comes to us and says, hey, I've got this problem with X, right? With zinc, with COD, with PFAS, whatever it is. We say, okay, well, we look at what is the data on paper, right? What's your historical data say? And then we can make some assumptions there. Well, hey, we've treated this same issue with this same profile, 20 times, or hey, this is a really unique thing. This might require some extra digging, or maybe we don't have all the data we need to make a good assessment here of your water. Either way, we start there, right, with what's the existing data. And then, most projects after that move to bench testing, which is basically, we get a sample of water from the client's facility of the stormwater in question. We, look at different treatment options at our lab, at our facility. We test those options. We basically run mini treatment systems, processing a few gallons of water each, and we look at the results in those different scenarios, right? And say, hey, what did this process achieve? What did that one achieve? Did it fall in line with what we expected? Was there any surprises that we did? Because before you want to spend any money on putting something, large and capital expense, much more expensive, it's a way to de-risk your project, right? And also give something back to your regulators or your other stakeholders that may be involved in a project like this to say, hey, we've done good due diligence. We've proven out that this is a sound approach, and here's the kind of the science to back that up, right? From there, I have a few clients that will then jump into maybe doing some pilot testing. So, hey, we have a large rental fleet of systems. We can roll out and say, hey, well, great. Everything you said on the data looks good. The bench test you ran with our water looks great, but we're just still nervous, or we want our people on site want to see it, and what is it really like? Well, then we can kind of go to pilot test and say, okay, well, let's not install the full thing, but let's install a small system and have it treat for a month or a season, right? And see how that goes. So that's another kind of step. And then from there, let's say, okay, we've got through, we've selected what we want, and now we're going to say, hey, we're going into full scale engineering. So we design it, we engineer it, we build it. Maybe there's other capital projects would have to go along with that. Maybe another engineer you need to put in a pad or get some power. Do some permitting, some other things there. We build the equipment, we install it, and then we support it through our parts and services group. In terms of different treatment technologies, like I said, it's mostly pump and treat type things, right? So we're talking, I have kind of listed them in order of the most common we'll see in stormwater applications that we do to less common, but coagulation systems, one of the most common: electrocoagulation, chemical coagulation, pH adjustment, oxidation, flotation systems, clarifiers, media filtration, cartridge bag filtration, ion exchange, adsorption, disinfection, membrane treatment. So a wide range of different things, right? And that's the challenge on any project is, okay, which of these, and or if multiples, which ones and what sequence, right? And that's what we're kind of trying to figure out each time, right? What's the recipe for a project that appropriately doesn't over design, right, or under design, but designs kind of just right to the need, right? So we've worked all over California. Our first project was back in 2004. So, from Bay Area down to LA, down to San Diego, Valley, et cetera. So all sorts of spots. And that is our background. So on to kind of the IGP side. So obviously the amendment, right, 2020, gosh, that's already, 3 years ago. Believe it or not, in a weird time. But that's what a lot of this talk here is on, right? What that amendment, the TMDL issues in there, and some of the additional challenges that raises. So there's a lot of other things in the amendment I'm not covering in this presentation, right? So things on sufficiently sensitive methods, on-site, off-site compliance options, et cetera. A couple links here, right? And if people want the deck, happy to send it along later on. Just shoot me an email. I've got my email at the end, or I'll put it in the chat as well. And I'll just do that now. In case anyone wants it, you have something to send me a note on. So latest amendment files here. And then again, just other good resources. I mean, there are so many links, right, in the water board sites. And so I just kind of drop them in there as a quick way, like, hey, if you're new to this or you're trying to navigate this for the first time, like Waterboard has put out a lot of stuff up there, and you should be, familiar, just use this as your starting point, right? So, all right. So the first one is, do TMDLs, apply to you first, right? If you're here, hopefully that's because you've already figured that out, but maybe you're like, I'm not sure. So obviously question one is, yeah, are you discharging stormwater? Yes, no. Okay, you do. Question two, then do you discharge stormwater to a TMDL? So this is where I'm going to walk you through the IGP permit mapping tool. Super helpful, but it's also not a panacea. What I mean by that is that, the water board's kind of said, like, hey, this is probably right, is my take on what they've said. But also, maybe there are things, right, that they don't know perfectly, right, in terms of having captured all the different infrastructure connections or things that change over time, right? And so you need to also do your own diligence and confirm, but it's a good starting point. And then, okay, so then you find out, do I discharge to a TMDL? Yes. Okay, well now, does my discharge contain a listed pollutant in that TMDL, right? So say there's a TMDL for zinc, for example. This waterway has a total maximum daily load, a limit, that it's trying to manage to for zinc, for example. Do I have zinc in my runoff? Is that something I'm, monitoring for my permit? Have I done a site-specific pollutant source assessment? Certainly there's kind of a couple different, there's things that are in the general permit, right? Then there's things that are added based on, your industry. Sometimes people are selecting things, based solely on SIT codes, right? We've seen people select, too many SIT codes, right? Because they say, well, there's three slots, I have to select 3 SIT codes. Well, not necessarily, right? I think you select the ones that are appropriate and true. And then there's still kind of a pollutant source assessment around, is there a source, an industrial source of zinc on my property, right? That could come into contact with stormwater. So, again, these are the things that a consultant, right, and a consulting engineer will kind of help guide you through when writing, your different compliance submittals for a project. But those are the things to navigate. All right, so like I mentioned, there's a whole mess of acronyms here. IGP, Industrial General Permit. Hopefully, if you're here, you know that. TMDL, as I said there, the total maximum daily load. So this is kind of an impairment plan by the regional board, EPA, which basically says, hey, this river can only take so much of this pollutant, right? And so we've found a way to kind of apportion that through all the different permit vehicles that we have to say, okay, industrial permit people, you guys just discharge this much zinc, and you over here, you discharge that much. And if we all do that, then maybe we'll get to the targets for this water body, right, in terms of how much zinc it can take. And so how these get implemented, a couple different groupings here. So you've got the NALs, numeric action levels, like you have in your basic industrial general permit, which maybe if you're in other states, not sure if everyone here is California, but like a benchmark basically means, hey, if you exceed it, try harder. It's not a violation of your permit to exceed it, but it is a line in the sand where it says, hey, this is what we're going for, right? There are things now called TNALs, which is a TMDL-based numeric action level, which says, hey, you had this number before of 5, but now we have a TNAL of 2, right? Because we found out actually, it needs to be a little lower for this one. Now, if you exceed it, it's still not a violation of your permit. We still want you to kind of do a similar thing, which is an ERA, or an exceedance response action, right? Kind of put together a report that says, well, this is what I'm going to do about it, right? I'm going to do this better, housekeeping. I'm going to put things under a roof. I'm going to do this sort of treatment thing, whatever it is, right? This is how I'm going to respond to exceeding that TNAL, right? So again, like a NAL, just a different number. Then you've got this other section that the TMDLs introduce, which are effluent limits. So NELs, numeric effluent limits. These have a water quality-based corrective action associated with them. If you are a member of CASCA, you have access to which is the California Stormwater Quality Association. They have a template for this report that you can access in the BMP handbook, which I put here. You have to kind of log in through your account, which is helpful. And so again, kind of like an ERA, exceedance response and action, in terms of it's a report that says what you're going to do about responding to this effluent limit, but it has some different content, right, that would typically be included in it. Again, something to kind of work through with your consulting engineer on what is our response, right? What is the corrective action we're going to take? The other aspect of exceeding NELs is that there's the potential to be subject to MMPs, acronym number 7 on the list, minimum mandatory penalties, which have a number of different layers to them, different types of violations, serious and chronic, different pollutants, group 1 and group 2, that are associated with them. I'll talk a little more about that on the next slide. And then you have also another call this kind of a shield in here called a time schedule order, which is basically you go to the water board and say, hey, water board, I can't meet these NELs, tomorrow. I need 3 years, right? And so give me some time and don't give me any MMPs during this period, and here's why, and here's a good plan, and da-da-da, right? And then you submit that, and, you know, they say yay or nay, right? So that's one other kind of tool in your tool belt to use for that. So, you know, what I've heard, you know, from various, you know, region people that have spoken on this is like, hey, well, you know, great. If somebody's reaching out to us, right, wants to do a TSO, right, that means they're kind of developing a plan, right? We'd love to kind of work with them, develop kind of a mutually agreeable time schedule order. You know, but there is kind of a backlog there. They're administered regionally. And each region can have its own, you know, criteria for what it wants. This is kind of an example from Region 4, but, you know, they're going to ask things like, okay, tell us about the facility. How much time do you want? You know, which pollutants are you, you know, wanting, you know, kind of wanting us to kind of wait on? What are the interim actions you're going to do? You know, why else do you need this extension? You know, is everything else on your site, you know, current, right? You know, if you're got, you know, the rest of your house isn't in order, it might be tough to get them to, you know, buy in for something like this, right? But these are things that you'd want to have answers to, right? If you're going to kind of walk into this. So how widespread are TMDLs? This is, you obviously can't read any of this, but this is just an Excel worksheet I have for myself that has all of the columns are the different individual constituents, and all of the rows are the different waterways, right? And then the reddish orange here are NELs, and the yellow are the TNALs. So you can kind of see it's about a 50-50 mix, right? 36 of these total, 26 are in LA, right? So lot in LA. You know, Dominguez Channel is the one that has, you know, the most, and then here's kind of the most common, right? So 22 copper TMDLs, 16 lead, 15 zinc, fecal coliform and enterococcus, total coliforms of bacteria, nickel, etc. So you can kind of see what are the most prevailing ones, what are the areas where they are, and so on. Okay, so here's a link to the attachment E, which is how you kind of figure out, do I have a TMDL that applies to me, right? And what do I do about it if I do? So here's an example of kind of the Ballona Creek Metals TMDL. You can see, okay, here's the TMDL, or the water, you know, the waterway, or what they've named kind of the TMDL group. And then here's the impaired water body, watershed, Ballona Creek or Sepulveda Canyon. Here's the pollutants in it, copper, lead, zinc. Here are the additional TMDL related numeric action level or numeric effluent limit, TNAL/NEL, we just talked about, for those items. So here we've got 3 NELs for copper, lead, and zinc that are lower concentrations than the general permit NALs. You've got what the required action is, which is, hey, you know, take these samples, report, etc. Here's when it starts. And then on this PDF, just a note, like the way it's formatted, how big these tables are, sometimes you got to turn the page because there's another, you know, this kind of carries on, right? So just make sure you look at that when you're working on it. Also, some of them have interim dates and final dates. So they'll say like, hey, you know, interim is 2024 and final is 2032. So make sure you note that and the different requirements in there. Okay. So the IGP Map Tool. So here's a link to this. What it is, right? You pull up to this tool, you plug in your address, right? Drop an address in there. Okay, it pops up this address. At first, though, this is kind of a stupid part about it, but you have to then click away, deselect the address, click somewhere in the orange area, and then click on the dot where your site is again. And then when you do that, now you'll see in this little area here, it'll say search result, one of whatever, right? And you'll see this arrow in the upper thing that you didn't see before. See here, search result, nothing, no arrow. Click away, click back on the dot. Now you'll see it, right? So now you're basically you're on the site that is in question. You can confirm that it's the right address, right? Your site, presumably, that you're looking at. Then you click through the arrows, and now you can see, okay, it's telling me Los Angeles River nitrogen TMDL and Los Angeles River metals TMDL. And then sometimes it lists them twice. I don't know why. It lists the nitrogen one again, right? But yeah, look through those. And then that's again, it's not a 100%, but in my experience, it's usually right. And is a good starting point, right, to kind of look at there. On the minimum mandatory penalties. So, you know, a lot of different resources again here that are available, you know, links. So just kind of put up, you know, a link to some of the 2023 violations, you know, link to where they track kind of total violations, right? You can see, you know, going back, you know, here 10 years, right? There's an upward curve here. Yeah, I think this only goes through like 2022 or mid 2021. So I'd be curious to see what the current looks like. I know last year they were really just like Region 4, like put out their first 50 that are associated specifically with this, like in April of 22 or something. So, you know, we're really not that far into it. Like here's an example letter, you know, one client get, so you get it from the water board and says, hey, here we have this settlement offer, right? Which is pay us, right, for this notice of violation. And here's the list of violations. Exhibit 1, you know, outfall 1, you know, zinc effluent violation of X. It's a, you know, group 2 chronic violation with X occurrences, therefore, you know, X $1,000, right? And where this gets, you know, it can, you know, $3,000 per violation. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like a lot compared to treatment, but when you start stacking them per outfall, per pollutant, per sample over time, right? You know, some of these facilities, you know, can get some pretty large numbers. And the 3,000 also, you know, is kind of the minimum. Again, so minimum mandatory penalty, not maximum. There is a discretionary aspect too, right? Where the water boards and others can come in and say, well, you didn't really respond very well to our first letter, so this time it's going up, right? I haven't really seen that happen yet, but I know that's been brought up, and you know, I think the longer it goes on, right, I think that's a risk. I think the other risk here too is if you're someone that's in the crosshairs of a third-party group or a other, you know, citizen suit, right, something, effluent violation of an NAL is a very clear, like, well, that, you know, the state says this is a permit violation, right? So therefore, we know you're bad, right? Versus an effluent exceedance on a NAL or a TNAL, which you can say, well, hey, this is only a, you know, we're aiming for it. Exceeding an NAL or a TNAL is not a permit violation. So there's also that risk of exceeding on the NALs. So, all right. So I think that is about all of the kind of permit and IGP TMDL specific stuff. Now I'm going to talk about, okay, you figured out that you've got this, you have a little lay of the land on what that means for you. How do I actually go about, how does this stuff get into my water in the first place? And how do I get it out of the water? Okay, so this is your facility ABC. It's 4 spots, right? You got air deposition, right? Things that can fall on your facility. You've got things coming into your facility, presumably, you know, cars or trucks. You've got what's below you in the ground, just your background soils. And then maybe you've got things that are generated in your process, right? If you're, you know, cutting metal or, you know, have any sort of industrial processes, right? So just thinking of all the possible, if someone's going to come out and do a pollutant source assessment, right? What are the things they might look at? Okay, so there's where my pollutants are from, but it really only matters if it rains and if they're in the water and leaving my site, right? So if my whole site's covered by roof, well, then I should be fine, other than if my roof's really bad, right? But it might not be feasible to cover 100% of your site. So, okay, water hits the ground, hits things on my ground, you know, runs across the surface, maybe runs into some underground infrastructure, right? Eventually hits my sample point. Okay, well, now I'm in trouble, right? Now the stuff is in my water. How do I get it out of there, right? So you're gonna have maybe some areas where it could settle out. Maybe you're putting some protection around your drains. Maybe you're trying to reuse it. Maybe you've got some plants, all sorts of different things, right? That may be considered. I would say, and then if you're trying to maybe send it to, you know, like the sewer or something, that kind of an offsite compliance option would be another thing, or treating it. So how are we, you know, once the stuff is in your water, how are we getting it out, right? Assume these little circles here are your pollutant of interest, whatever's of interest to you. Well, I can use gravity, right? I can settle it out with a pond or a tank that's large enough. I can use filtration. I can try and just use some sort of blocking thing that it physically can't pass through. I can use absorption. I can have it kind of go into something like a plant, typically, right? Uptake into the plant. Or adsorption, maybe some sort of media that kind of gets the pollutant to stick to the surface of something, right? So all these have some different, pretty much any treatment control you would install, it's going to use one of these four fundamental processes, right? Of the millions of products and technologies that exist in the world, right? Gravity, well, what's my limitation there? If I've got really large stuff, well, gravity is pretty great, right? Things will sink quickly, maybe in a matter of seconds, right? But as I get smaller into sands or silts, right, things take not minutes, but hours or days or years to settle out, right? And then those are not feasible, right? The size of the tank or basin I'd have to install just would exceed the size of my property, right? And especially in a lot of sites in California, there isn't maybe the space in some of the dense areas that we have. So really, it depends on feasibility of this option depends on your particle size. So. Filtration, right? A whole range of things in filtration. That could be anything from a simple bag filter all the way up to reverse osmosis that they use for drinking water, right? These are all different types of filtration, just at different size levels, right? A bag filter might be 100 microns in size, whereas a reverse osmosis, down to 0.001 microns in size. Just different sorts of ways to block particles from passing through. But once you block them, they still have to go somewhere, right? They're still on that filter. They have to be removed or cleaned or backwashed or concentrated some other way. Absorption and adsorption, again, kind of highlighted here, maybe like living systems or carbon filters or media, specialized media filters that absorb things. Questions here would be like, how much time does my water need to be in contact with these different environments in order for them to absorb or adsorb enough contaminant for my design, right, to work? So that gets into some different sizing things there. So the three big drivers that I see for getting to active treatment, which is pump and treat systems, not just something that you could do through housekeeping or changing, how you're cleaning or things like that, are kind of these three categories, which is particle size, dissolved components, and other specialty issues. So particle size, right? This, in general, the smaller the stuff you're dealing with, the harder it's going to be to deal with. And the harder it's going to be to deal with through non-active treatment, not using chemistry or other specialized treatment methods to get at those very fine particles. Dissolved metals, and other dissolved components, right, often can be influenced heavily by pH. So zinc, for example, if you've never seen kind of a pH solubility curve, this is pH scale on the x-axis, and then this is the concentration of a metal on the y-axis. So neutral pH, basic, acidic, and it just says, hey, at a neutral pH, zinc, you can have like 80 parts per million of zinc that can remain in a soluble form in the water, which everyone knows the permit, right? We need to be like under 1, like under 0.26, maybe under whatever, right? Some really low numbers. So as you raise the pH, that zinc becomes, precipitates out of the water, basically forms some zinc hydroxide, becomes less soluble, and then it's easier to kind of grab onto it, remove it through other methods. So pH adjustment often can play a critical role when we're talking about dissolved metals. And then other contaminants that I'll just call a group of specialty contaminants, things like BOD, COD, nitrates, selenium, that each have their own non-standard treatment approaches to deal with. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I'm just going to focus on TMDL ones. And then just high level, right? Whenever we're designing a system, there's a couple things to consider, right? But basically inputs, outputs, right? I've got dirty water coming in. I want clean water and some sort of waste coming out, right? I'm taking that mixture of pollutants and water, and I'm separating it into clean water and pollutants. And so I want to do that in the most efficient way possible with whatever my system is. And I also need it to handle a good amount of variability, right? I'm going to put in a system and it's going to have, a number of components that can't change, like a tank that's 20,000 gallons. I can't just all of a sudden make 30,000 gallons. But maybe it has things that I could change, like maybe what medias I'm using, or what flow rate I'm running the system at, or how much chemical is going into it. So I've got to have ways to kind of deal with this variability, but also I don't get to have variable effluent targets, right? But I have to deal with a variable influent in stormwater. So that's certainly one of the biggest challenges of stormwater for any designer in any industry. A lot of people will be like, hey, wastewater, drinking water, much easier challenges in some areas, because of their consistency. But stormwater can have a lot of variability depending on, your site and type of operation that you have. Okay, so metals TMDLs. Here are the ones, right? There's 1 for selenium, 6 for nickel, 3 for cadmium, 1 for mercury, 22 for copper, 15 for zinc, 16 for lead. Again, pH adjustment is key here. Zinc and copper, the most challenging ones, but just because there's so many of them, they're often low numbers, often require pH adjustment. Nickel, I see every once in a while, but really these are the big ones. Lead, there are some, but lead's usually precipitates out at kind of lower pHs and usually easier to get out of there. So that's the high level kind of to consider there. Some examples here. This is really one where, metals, that they were dealing with particulate metals, but very fine particulate, right? So when we talk about that particle size issue, this is a case where a client put in a oil water separator and a 20 micron media filter above ground and some other tanks and things like that. And so they got, some pretty good reduction here from the blue to the orange, right? They got, let's say, 50 to 80% reduction on their target things, their aluminum, their copper, their iron, their lead, their zinc, but they really needed more like 90 to 95% reduction. And when you looked at their particle size analysis, more than 90% of their particles were under 10 microns, right? And so the larger stuff was getting filtered out by that 20 micron, but the smaller stuff was just going straight through it. So when we retrofitted this system with some coagulation to basically get all those small things to come together and get bigger before we got to the filtration stage, then you can see that's where we go down to the gray line here. We're able to knock those down, use the same filter and have it be efficient, but just get those things larger so that that filter could work and they weren't just slipping right through it. This is a case of dissolved metals, the site in LA, where they're dealing with lead. And here, well, almost no TSS, unlike this last site, right, which had super high TSS, but high lead due to the operations they were doing on site. And you can see here when we adjust the pH, now all of a sudden you see this lead precipitate come out of the water, right? Just by doing that adjustment. And then when we filter that, now we're able to grab onto and remove that lead more easily when it's in that right pH phase. Okay, the next group of TMDLs are kind of, I've got kind of the organic or carbon-based TMDLs. So there's 4 for PCBs, 1 for PAHs. These are the ones I'd say you see more often. And then I rarely see these, but there's chloridane, dissolved methyl mercury, 4,4-DDT, and dieldrin, different pesticides and cations. PCBs, number of sites, I can think of at least 3 that we've worked with that have it. Example for one here, their goal was around 0.014. The numbers here, right? These are picograms, right? So they're very low limits, extremely low limits. Here this is 1, 2, 3. This is 14 picograms here, I think. Am I doing that right? I always mix up the micro to the pico, but it's such a rare thing that you see. So in these cases, right, we met their targets. We were doing polishing filtration. After we did all of the coagulation, settling filtration, we did some adsorptive filtration or some adsorption using carbon, granular activated carbon, to remove those PCBs. Again, because they are carbon-like substances themselves, they like adhering to other carbon-like substances, and that removes them pretty well. So a couple sites we've done that. Nitrogen TMDLs. So there's nitrate, nitrite, N+N, ammonia, and nitrogen. Really challenging here, right? Highly soluble in water, typically need to address in a targeted way. My experience, the kind of the one site that we've done that's had a kind of an N+N focus has been the using an ion exchange that targets that. These are typically negatively charged things, right? So they have a different overall chemistry than trying to go after metals removal. So phosphorus TMDLs, again, really there's 5 of them, pretty low limits compared to other places in the country, right? As an example, it's 0.16 to 0.64. Our industrial general permit in Washington has a target of 2. Getting these things out through precipitation really is even hard to get down to these numbers, but there's different methods we can employ to keep chipping away at it, right, to get it as low as possible, and had a couple sites that have done that. The bacteria TMDLs, fecal, entero, total coliform. There's a lot of things to do disinfection-wise, right? Chemical, UV, otherwise, that can be done, that we have done. A lot of like transfer station sites and things like that. This is one site in SoCal that we did that has a UV on its final polish. We did, a bench testing and a pilot test here, as well as kind of just finished up the full-scale treatment installation here a couple months ago. And they have, gosh, this site has almost everything. They've got nitrates, they've got phosphorus, they've got bacteria, metals. So dealing with really the kitchen sink on this kind of facility. And there's some data from the pilot here, but met all their targets that they were working towards. And then kind of the last area I'll highlight is really, well, great. So that's the current permit. There's also a new permit coming out eventually, right? And other things in the future, right, that can come up. So I know people talk about kind of the term emerging contaminants a lot, right? And what is an emerging contaminant? And if you look at this missive from the Congressional Research Service, there really isn't a definition, even by the government, but no federal statutory definition, at least. But people use it kind of informally to refer to, things like pharmaceuticals and wastewater, and, PFAS is one of the big ones, right? But how I would think of it maybe for, yourself as a stormwater professional, right, as an IGP, purveyor is, okay, is this something that to me is emerging because it's now regulated at a lower level, right? Like, I didn't really care about copper and zinc when the limit was up here, right? But when the limit's down here, all of a sudden it's a problem. And maybe a very different problem with a whole different set of technologies and solutions and approaches to deal with it, right? So that to me seems like an emerging problem. Is this something that's maybe just new to my permit, right? So it's not a contaminant that is being regulated at a lower level, but it got added onto my permit maybe because a change in the permit, a change in my pollutant source assessment, or the activities on my site. And now this is something that I have to get up to speed on that I didn't need to know before. Or is this something that's, maybe new to the entire world, right? Like everyone kind of ramped up on PFAS at the moment. If anyone's heard about 6-PPD, PPD quinone, other pharmaceutical things, et cetera. These are things that, I think are the more traditional emerging contaminants in that, they're not really on anyone's permit yet for the most part, but they are, maybe going to be on someone's permit in the future, right? We're trying to figure out, these are things we're trying to figure out how to even analyze, right? With instruments and methods in the lab, we can't, or it's difficult to regulate if there isn't a means for the regulated entity to sample for said constituent, right? So something that people are looking at. PFAS, right? I'll just kind of close with this one because that's the biggest one, and I know there's lots of movies and news and hot button issues on it. But right, there's all sorts of resources on California's PFAS investigations and work, right? They're looking at here, you can see one of their mapping tools where they're looking at airports and chrome platers and landfills and treatment facilities and bulk fuel terminals and all these different areas, right, where they're trying to start developing a data history around PFAS, right? And I expect that to continue across, all sorts of industries, right? It has the attention of the whole country in lots of levels at a speed that I've never really seen before. And I expect it to be there for, the next few decades. Here's an example just kind of down in San Diego in particular, right? Where they're looking at, specific programs and sites, and you can go and look at it, what they're doing on cleanup. We're currently involved in multiple PFAS projects, including those in California. And we've got a site in the Bay Area right now where we've been treating for, 3-4 years or so. It was a site where there was a large firefighting activity due to some fires up there. And, they're looking at PFOA, PFAS, total PFAS, and you see, their influent levels here pretty high. And these are nanograms, but when you're talking PFAS issues, that's what they're looking at is nanogram levels. They had a target of roughly 40 nanograms per liter. So you can see here kind of the blue is our first stage of treatment, which we take it down from, let's say, 10 to 70,000 down to, the hundreds. And then from there, we've got other stages of polishing treatment that get it down below this 40 nanogram per liter level. So there you go. There's my info. Like I said, I was right at about 40 minutes was my hope, and then keep it open for some questions. And if there's not questions, you get out early. But if there are, then want to leave it open and be a resource for people for a few minutes. So
fantastic. It looks like there is one question in the chat, and that is there any way for a site to be inspected for TMDLs prior to any work just to get to baseline? And are there any waivers for TMDLs that are already present on site?
I'm going to read that question again. That is, okay, so is there any way for a site to be inspected for TMDLs prior to work? Not just to get a baseline. Do you mean inspected for TMDLs? Do you mean sample? I don't know, is that if that person is here, if they're able to unmute themselves or maybe expand a little more on their question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, since you're saying in wastewater TMDLs, they have such an extremely low level that could set off and make you uncompliant. So what about natural occurring ones on site? Like if there's high copper in the ground, are there any inspections that can be done prior to even construction or industrial work getting started so that you don't, and a waiver you can sign and turn in, so that you don't be uncompliant in any areas, just in case there are high, like metals in the ground or anything like that.
Yeah, and you're thinking of for industrial general permit, right? Not like construction activity. Yeah. I have not seen a TMDL waiver. You can do background studies, which says like, hey, I have this, I did this, air deposition study. I did this soils background study, right? And you can submit that as a, way to, ask for, don't regulate this for me, I have not seen anyone be successful with that, because what the bar is that you have to prove there is that is the only and sole source of that contaminant, right? At my facility. And that's a high bar to prove. And they don't, have to, give you that. I don't obviously know of all the cases. The cases I know of that people have done that, they have not gotten that. Maybe it helps kind of lessen the focus, right, from maybe a third party group or the regulator. Maybe it lowers them down on the enforcement, priority list. But yeah, in terms of like getting it struck from their permit altogether or not having a sample for it altogether, I haven't seen that yet. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. It doesn't look there's any more questions. So if you do have a question, we do have one more question that's not related to the topic, but they want to know if you're related to musician Mark Mothersbaugh.
You know, I believe, yes, I have not met Mark. My father says he is our third cousin on the Ohio side of the family. But I have not attempted to make contact or verify that family trait. So
Fun question. Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up here soon. If you have any final questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. But thank you for participating in Stormwater Awareness Week. If you missed any part of this presentation because technical difficulties or you had to leave early or join late, you can watch this on our website and it's going to be available in the next 24 to 48 hours. But a huge thank you to TJ. This is always a favorite presentation of ours for Stormwater Awareness Week. He's been here multiple years and we're so excited for that. But we have a great lineup for the rest of the day and the rest of the week, so be sure to go over to stormwaterawareness.org to find out all that information. So
thank you so much.
TJ.
Yep. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks all.